of that comes through social media. And you and I, we've got to make sure that we're taking the time to understand it. And more importantly, we've got to make sure that we're taking the time to understand it. And more importantly, to actually use it. There is no learning like actually doing something unless you're going to go teach it, but you can't teach it until you've done it, particularly around social media. So when we look at Gen Z, they're driving trends from the youngest up to the oldest. They're using these smart devices and social media. And what else are we seeing? They are the generation most willing to challenge norms, to challenge preconceived ideas, to challenge, oh, it's always been done this way. Gen Z is the #1 generation to challenge that, to say, okay, it's been done that way. But generation to challenge that, to say, okay, it's been done that way, but why don't we try it this way? Have you used this technology? Have you looked at this solution? What about this over here? They're willing to challenge what we would call the status quo, right? They're willing to challenge it. Just because somebody's done it that way for a long time doesn't mean we should do it that way into the future. Now look, some people, they get uncomfortable. Well, you know, it's worked before and that's the way we're supposed to do it and all that stuff. I'm not saying that because you've done something a long time that it doesn't work and won't work into the future. I'm just saying that Gen Z is saying, what if there's another path? Should we consider it? And being open to that conversation. Gen Z also is incredibly diverse. They're really interested in social causes. And right now, Gen Z is determining their brand loyalty as consumers. Gen Z right now is determining where do they want to be loyal as consumers, as customers. This is absolutely the perfect time to not only understand Gen Z, but to determine what is your strategy to engage them. What are the actions, the activities, the strategies that you are using right now to connect with, build trust, and influence this incredibly important generation? By the way, as you think globally, did you know that Gen Z is the most similar generation all around the world? Why is that? Inexpensive mobile devices. The less expensive that mobile devices get, the more young people have access to them, and then the more similar they are around the world because they use those devices to connect with everything from entertainment and learning to money to news, you name it. And all of a sudden, as I travel all around the world, Gen Z is the most similar generation. Does that mean they're identical? No, of course not. But they're much more similar around the world than, say, Generation X and certainly baby boomers. So as we think about Gen Z, the key thing is this. They are an absolutely perfect fit for the opportunity that you have as long as you take the time to understand them, recognize your own generational viewpoint, and then adapt to meet them where they are. Remember, one size doesn't fit all, but once you understand it, you can figure out what do you want to do to engage each generation. Which leads me to the millennials, my people, my own generation, millennials. What do we need to know about millennials? Well, first, there's a lot of millennials. They're often the biggest generation. When we think about millennials, what else do we need to know? Millennials are older than most people assume. When I ask these huge audiences, how old is the average millennial? How old are millennials? People are always guessing in their 20s and maybe early 30s. But did you know the oldest millennials are now age 40 and even a little bit older? In fact, I'm an older millennial and somebody just interviewed me for one of these big media outlets about middle-aged millennials. I was like, whoa, slow it down there. But the key is this. Millennials are much older than people assume. For some reason, we've sort of stuck in our mind that millennials are always 25. But we've been talking about that 25-year-old millennial for 15 years. I wrote a book about millennials 15 years ago. And millennials have continued to get older and older and older. They're starting their own families. They're making major purchases. In terms of actual spending power, millennials often have the biggest spending power. They are spending the money. Does that mean they have the money? Not necessarily, but they are spending the money. Our research also shows that millennials are the most entrepreneurial generation, meaning they want to own their own business. Now, one big difference between millennials and Gen Z that we're seeing is that millennials want to own and build their own business as really a primary function. I want to do this full time, where Gen Z tells us they want to do it more on the side in addition to something else. So they want to keep a job or do something else and start a business on the side. And if it all works out, eventually maybe do it full time. Millennials, we're finding, are much more, I really want to do this full time. What else do we need to know about millennials? Well, there's a perception, and finish the sentence with me. Millennials, they are tech. What would the fill in the blank be there? Most places in the world, they would say savvy. Millennials are tech savvy, because we've heard this forever, right? Millennials came of age around the internet, around all these different technologies. They saw it, but they remember before as well as now. They remember the before. Gen Z doesn't remember the before. Remember, technology is only new if you remember it the way it was before. So if you're a millennial, what have we uncovered through our research is that millennials are not tech savvy, but what millennials are, they are tech dependent. That means they don't know how the technology works. They just know they cannot live without it. And what's the number one thing they need more than anything else? Right here, mobile device. This is their connection to the world. Now, when we think about this, it's important because there's a big difference between somebody being tech savvy versus being tech dependent. Now, how do we separate those two? Somebody who's tech savvy knows how everything works and all the back end and everything underneath that makes it happen. Somebody who's tech dependent just relies on it. The way we think about being tech dependent is tech dependent when it comes to millennials always comes down to one key question, and that is, how simple can you make it so it just works? They want that technology to work easily. They expect it to happen and it should just work like magic and be done and that's it, so they can go on to the next thing, because millennials are busy. Millennials are starting their own families, their children are getting older, they're thinking of all these long-term relationships. They're at a really important life stage. Now, what is nobody talking about when it comes to millennials? And that is that millennials are the number one most likely generation to refer a friend to this exact opportunity. Number one, more than anyone else. When we look at all the generations, the number one group to refer friends, family, and people that they know to get into this opportunity, to be able to build a business, to be an entrepreneur, are millennials, more than anyone else. So as we start to think about this, just notice, remember, Gen Z is the youngest, millennials are older than Gen Z, and then we get to Generation X, Gen X in the house. For all my Gen Xers, so glad to be with you today, because so often nobody talks about Gen X, and you are so incredibly important. Generation X is incredibly important, but many times people sort of skip over them. And we need to really take the time to understand this important generation, because in an organization like yours, Generation X is the glue. They are the bridge, really the bridge between the different generations. And the better we understand them, the better we can leverage that bridge, use that bridge to connect across generations. What do we know about Generation X? Well, first, Generation X is naturally skeptical. This is a big deal. They're naturally skeptical. Or as my wife loves to say, trust but verify. My wife is in Generation X. She's very Gen X. She often likes to say, where did you get your data from? Gen X is the only group that will come up to me at the big live events. If you've earned the way to get to go to one of those, maybe you've seen me in the past. If not, hopefully you'll get to see me at one in the future. Gen X is the group that comes up to me afterwards, and they always say this: Jason, I enjoyed your presentation. I didn't think I would. I'd love to see your data. Because Generation X, they're into the data, the details. They want to know where you got your information from. They're naturally skeptical. And sometimes other generations, particularly millennials, are like, oh, well, you don't like me? And it's like, no. It's not that Gen X doesn't like you. It's that they don't believe you. And that's okay. Because if you know that they're going into a conversation, if they're considering an opportunity, and they want to know where you got your data from, they want to get into the details, all that means is you've got to be prepared to show up with the details, with answers to their questions. Be prepared to not be offended, but say, oh, let me really get into that question with you because it's a great one and I'm so glad you asked it. Gen X also likes backup plans. They don't like to be stuck or trapped. By the way, it's part of what makes them such great entrepreneurs. Gives them the ability to go out there and grow because they're always thinking through different options. Gen X makes fantastic leaders because they could see where millennials are coming from, they could see where baby boomers are coming from, and Generation X is into the details. It's those details that really give them that superpower to understand a problem or an opportunity really well. Now, what else are we hearing about Gen X? We're hearing a lot that Gen X feels pulled in 3 different directions. Listen carefully. What Gen X tells us is right now, they feel like they're taking care of a parent or parents. Often, they're taking care of a child or children, and they're trying to navigate work or starting their own business or growing their own business. So they really feel pulled in 3 different directions. In fact, our research shows that Gen X is right now deciding what do they want to do for the next stage of their life. This is such a big deal. As you look across your organization, It's very, very important to keep Generation X engaged right now, to let them know how valuable they are, how much you appreciate them, how much you believe in them, because they're deciding, are they going to do this now for the next several years, or should they look somewhere else? I think that's a huge opportunity to separate yourself as a leader. So now we've talked about Gen Z, the youngest, and millennials, and Generation X. And then that brings us to the oldest generation. We're going to talk about baby boomers. Baby boomers. I love baby boomers. People are like, Jason, why are you always so excited about baby boomers? Like, because they changed the world. They're absolutely amazing. By the way, baby boomers are often the parents of millennials. So you can start to see that parenting connection. Super interesting. So what do we need to know about baby boomers? First of all, a lot of people think, oh, well, boomers' time has passed. That is totally false, absolutely false. What we find is that baby boomers are often the most influential group within an organization. Why? They often are in senior leadership roles. They've built the organization up. They have the longest tenured relationships. They often control the wealth personally and within a country. When we think about baby boomers, people are like, oh, they're on their way out. That is totally and completely false, and we got to let go of that. Because boomers are very much driven right now in impact, in identity, in delivering results. They're incredibly excited to do that. So what do you need to know? First, baby boomers have a really strong work ethic. They've been working a long time, and it's important to them. We see this all around the world, by the way. It's very important that boomers know that you're working because they're working, right? So we want to really understand that work ethic. They value that. Boomers believe there are no shortcuts to success. You must pay your dues. They believe in policies and procedures and protocol. They like all those things. Tell me the rules and I'll figure it out how to make it work. Baby boomers also feel like they need to see that you're working. That's how you're out there having that impact. I have to teach younger generations sometimes. I'm like, look, if you're trying to connect with a baby boomer, it's okay to tell them that you spend a lot of time preparing for the meeting, that you really put the work in to make the most of your time with them. They appreciate that. Remember, boomers often control the wealth. Maybe there's going to be a big wealth transfer. Maybe there's not. We'll wait and see. And they're incredibly, incredibly influential. Because remember, when you control the wealth, you have dramatic influence. So they often are in senior leadership roles. They have the most work experience. They have the longest tenured relationships. All of these things put together, and you pretty quickly see, okay, baby boomers really are important. And as much as we want to talk about millennials and Gen Z, which we should, we want to make sure and always talk about all the generations together. That's what's called generational context. So when you want to go share this information with those on your team, those that you seek to inspire, it's very important not just to talk about one generation, but to always talk about at least 2, 3, and preferably 4, because it's a combination of the generation, how they all come together. That's what unlocks the power. That's what unlocks the results. Now I want to clear up something real fast. I was speaking at an event and a gentleman, I'll never forget this. He says, Jason, you got a good business here. You're a speaker, you write books, you run a research firm, you serve on boards, you do all these things. I got it. But let me ask you a question as a very experienced CEO. What are you going to do when you are no longer a millennial? It was so awkward. So just so you and I are on the same page, you stay in the same generation. You just get older. You don't go from being a millennial to being Gen X to being a boomer. It doesn't work like that. Baby boomers were once teenagers. Am I right, boomers? That was a lot of fun too. And then you just got older and older and older, but you stay in the same generation. Okay, what are the strategies and tactics that you can use now that you understand about each of the different generations, your own generation? How do you start to leverage your own generational strengths to lead across all these different generations, to instantly, quickly build that trust, that influence, close sales, drive those results that you need across multiple generations? Because remember, you're having to lead, connect, market, sell, build relationships with multiple generations, maybe even in the same room, and certainly over the same period of time. This will also help you with innovation. As you're thinking about ways to innovate how you're leading, how you're approaching situations, challenges, and opportunity. When we think about innovation, so often people think, oh, well, innovation, we need different viewpoints. But generations, this is really important, generations give us that diversity of thought, because you're bringing people that have a different generational view, generational lens into a conversation, into a problem, into an opportunity, and they're naturally looking at it differently. We need that diversity of thought, that generational diversity of thought, to really be able to innovate and lead across all these different organizations and for you to continue to build your organization. We want to make sure and also think about how do we cultivate and develop teamwork with different generations, because you and I need to be aware we have probably 2, 3, 4 generations. In my organization, I have 4 different generations. By the way, I have 3 generations at my house, so I'm living this with you. So we want to make sure that we're able to think about how do we apply this in all these different circumstances. So let me give you some very specific actions that you can use. If you haven't started taking notes yet, grab your pen, grab your paper, get whatever it is you take notes on. If you take them on your phone, that's fine. But get ready, because I want to be able to go in and dive into each of these. So the first thing I want you to be aware of is when you're going out to engage with somebody, be aware of what generation they may or may not be in. There's lots of ways you can figure this out, and we're not trying to put people in a box, but just be aware of, oh, if they're a lot younger, maybe they're going to want to communicate differently than the way that I prefer to communicate. Or if they're a lot older than you, maybe they want to communicate differently than the way you're used to. Remember, there is zero incentive for people to adapt how they communicate, how they would shop, or even how they would buy based on what's most comfortable for you. Instead, you have to be the one to adapt to them. That is what ultimately makes you a leader. Let's talk about the next one as we think about this. So we've gone from take a step back, take a pause, understand what works. Now I want to give you an example. Let's pretend that an associate has received a new preferred customer. You've got a new preferred customer, however they got there. I want you to be thoughtful about, okay, what generation are they? Because that's going to impact the activities maybe we want to do together, the training they need, the mentoring and the coaching from the very first moment. This is so important. When you engage with somebody the first time, you only have that one moment to make not only that first impression. People often say, oh, you get one chance to make a first impression. Yeah, but I would say even further than that, you get one chance to create expectations. And so as you're thinking about generations, be very aware when you go to engage that first time around, best practices, training, mentoring, coaching, whatever it is, be clear that that is your moment to truly think about what are the expectations I want to set with them. Is that me as a learner? Is that me as somebody who's always trying to grow as well? Is that me as somebody who's saying, how do I motivate across generations? You have to model that, and that first interaction from the very beginning has such a huge impact. In fact, in this type of a business, did you know that the first 30 days has huge influence over what happens over the next 30 months? That's right, 30 days has 30 months of impact. If you want it to really work, we got to be clear as we go into this. First 30 days is absolutely critical to driving those outcomes over the next 30 months. So let's talk about Gen Z. What do you need to know to really connect with Gen Z? First, what we're seeing is that Gen Z is very lifestyle focused. You need to think about this when you're engaging with them. Something that matters to you, let's say I want to make a lot of money, I just made that up, and somebody over here really cares more about lifestyle and freedom, you need to make sure that you connect one with the other, because sometimes people don't. So what we're seeing is Gen Z really wants lifestyle. They want freedom on their calendar. They want a business and career path, but at the same time, they want to make sure they can still have a life. So this is important. They want to know that anyone can be successful if they're willing to take the actions. And you got to be the one to show them what those actions are. Remember, Gen Z has less experience in the real world than any other generation. What's the best thing that you can do? I love this. The best thing we've seen to unlock the potential of Gen Z specifically is provide examples of what you've seen works best. How do you provide those examples? It could be video, it could be a training in person, it could be a lot of different things. But the key is you need to provide examples. It turns out video and visuals seem to work the best for Gen Z because that's what they've come up being able to see and experience. So the key is be aware of their life stage. Remember, they're the youngest. Be aware of what they're trying to go for. And if you don't know, ask. You may be shocked to go, wow, lifestyle and freedom is more important to them than just making more money right now, because they're trying to put these two things together. And then provide very specific examples of what you're seeing work best. You're going to shorten their learning curve, and then the faster they can start to have some success, the more they're going to stick with it. Remember, first 30 days leads to the first 30 months. What are we finding about millennials? Well, millennials, my people, they're older, remember, than Gen Z. They've got more long-term responsibilities. This can be everything from families to maybe they bought a house to a car to all kinds of things that are longer term. What we're finding is that millennials are very focused right now on income. Remember, they've got a lot more responsibilities than Gen Z. They've got a lot of things going on. At the same time, they're getting older so they can sort of see down the line, I need to be thoughtful about money. So we want to make sure that we're talking with them about the idea that this can generate the income that you need in order to reach your goals. Now, you got to do all the work. There are no shortcuts in this business. None, zero, zippo, do not exist. But if you're willing to do the work, if what you want is income, then you'll be able to help them to get there. Let them see how to get there. We don't make promises because nobody can promise anything, but you can absolutely show people what works. And if that's their goal, you can help them to see how they can get there. What else do we know? We know that millennials, just like Gen Z, are very focused on video and social media. So whenever you want to post on social media, if you're going, Jason, I want to use social media, but I have no idea what to post, here's some basic things we see. Videos seem to work really, really well. People are much more likely to hit play or watch a play button, click on it to see a video pop up and watch what's going on than they are to read a lot of text. By the way, the younger you go, the more you want to watch a video. The older you go, the more text is interesting. So what kind of videos? Humanizing videos. Videos that really share your experience, your perspective. You don't have to be an expert. Nobody expects you to be an expert, but you're a human. So bring that to life so people can connect and engage with you. Social media is very, very important, and even more so going forward. And what we see with social media is you need to post regularly. Sometimes you're like, well, I posted, Jason, and nothing happened. Well, of course not. You only did it 1 time or 5 times or 10 times. This, just like anything else, just like working out and getting in shape, anything you're trying to do, you got to be consistent over a long period of time. Social media is exactly that way. Videos, photos, perspectives, things you've learned, that's perfect for social media. Allows people to see you in a very humanized way, so they then want to connect with you and build trust and get to know you and understand what you're doing that really seems to be working so well. What else do we see with millennials? That you want to be able to talk about where they can be in 6 months and a year. They need to see that they can get there over a period of time that's not 5 years away or 10 years away. That's too long. What does 6 months look like? What does 12 months look like? You got to be able to give them a shorter window of time so they can believe it. Now, this is my favorite. What we find with millennials is so often people want to communicate or market in a linear set. So they want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the 5 steps to get here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, what we found is that many millennials do not think linear. They're very outcome focused. And the best thing you can do is show them the end first. Is this what you want? Is this the thing that you're driving for? Absolutely. Let me work backwards and show you how to get there. What we find is that is such a more effective way to communicate with them. We call it communicating in reverse. You take the same 5 steps you normally use. The difference is you start with step 5 and work backwards 1 time. All right, let's talk about Generation X. Gen X in the house. What do we need to know about Generation X? Most important strategy we've seen is Generation X loves scenario planning. Think about it as a what-if scenario. If you do this, this will happen. If this happens, you can respond this way. Those scenarios, backup plans, really thinking through all the different options, not feeling trapped. Such a big deal. Generation X really is into scenario planning. So you want to be very thoughtful when you're talking with them. You can draw it out on paper. You can have it on a slide. You can post it somewhere. But the idea is you want to show different paths so they're not stuck. And if this happens, you can do this. Scenario planning works really, really, really well with Gen X. They also want to know where you got your information from. I know that seems obvious, but it's important, right? This is not anything you made up. This is really good information. Whether you found it, whether you read it, whatever it is, you want to make sure and let them know where you got your information from and give them the ability to go deeper. Did you find it online? Did you find it from a resource? Provide those links. Let them see for themselves that what you're talking about is true. That will build their trust, because when they go out and they double check it and they come back and it turns out you're telling the truth, their trust in you goes up. One of my favorite things to do with Generation X is provide a resource of frequently asked questions. A place where they can go, where questions have been asked, that they can just learn, oh, I was thinking this exact same thing. I was thinking that exact same thing. I wondered what the answer was. Frequently asked questions, being a resource is really important to Gen X. And the more you're a resource that they can trust, the more excited they're going to be to work with you. And then we get to my baby boomers. Boomers in the house. Boomers, boomers. I love baby boomers. Okay, what do we need to know about baby boomers? We're finding right now when they look at a business like this, they think about things like community, wellness, connection. This is important because sometimes people look at boomers and they don't naturally recognize that. But what we find is baby boomers very much want that sense of community. They want to really think about wellness. They want to think about socializing, connecting. This is really key. So when you go to engage with them, what you may be talking about that gets them most excited is not building a business or these different things, but the fact that they're now part of a community focused on wellness, and the fact that they can socialize and connect. You also want to show stories or show pictures of people like them succeeding. Tell the stories They need to see that people in their generation can be successful too, that this isn't just for somebody who's younger or a certain age, but it's for anybody. Baby boomers also want a blueprint of what has worked to succeed. They like that blueprint. Hey, what's the playbook? What do we know works? And give it to them in a format that absolutely fits them. Let them tell you how they want that information. Okay, we've covered each of the different generations, but I want to give you 3 quick things that you can leave with before I share this last story. First, I want to look across all of the generations. Remember, they're clues and not a box. The better you understand them and your own generation, the faster you can choose to connect across each of those different age groups and generations. The strategy that we see work now, the best one, this is number 1, the strategy that we see work the best right now is this sort of tagline or this mantra or this theme. Ready? It's as unique as you are. When you let people know that there's an opportunity as unique as them, that they get to make it their own, it's one of the best things that we've seen work. By the way, this really works with millennials and Gen Z. As unique as you are. Remember, generations are clues and not a box, but these are the types of clues we want to use. Second, that when you go into why this is such a huge opportunity and why you're excited, keep in mind that what gets you excited may not be what gets somebody else excited. What do I mean by that? We did a study where we asked people, what would you rather have? A certain amount of money, or you could do the same thing and instead of having that certain amount of money at the end, you could not have to work on Fridays. And do you know what? A whole group, 2 generations in fact, said that what they really wanted was the freedom to not work on Fridays more than a whole bunch of money at the end. They'd rather take the time now and have a better lifestyle than money. So ask them, be forward. Hey, what are you really fired up about? What do you want to do? What does success look like to you? Rather than assuming that somebody else wants the same success as you. And then the last one is that when you're trying to help somebody be successful, particularly in this industry, it's very easy to focus on tangible outcomes. And that could be new preferred customers or growth or some other thing. But remember, when people are ramping up, they're still trying to figure out what works for them. So what I would encourage you to do, and we see this works across every generation, instead of just rewarding those outcomes, those big moments, reward progress. Recognize progress. Let them know that they're moving forward, even though they may not feel that they're moving forward. This is very important because you have the experience and the perspective to know, oh wow, you're really moving forward. You're making great gains, but they may not see that, so let them know. Now, why am I so passionate about this industry? Well, this industry changed my life. When I was 18 years old, I met somebody in this industry who believed in me, who showed me that I too could own my own business and start to influence my future and help people. And they absolutely changed my life. I believe you're one of those people, and I believe that you can change lives too. So on behalf of me and my wife Denise and my daughter Raya, thank you so very much for the lives that you change. We are so grateful for you. Thank you.
इस मोटिवेशनल प्रेजेंटेशन के लिए बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद जेसन। आपने हमें सिखाया कि हम बदलती हुई पीढ़ियों के हिसाब साथ कैसे काम कर सकते हैं। दोस्तों, आज का दिन हमारा कितना शानदार रहा। हमें अलग अलग महान स्पीकर से बहुत सारी जानकारियां मिली। दोस्तों, आज यहाँ का दिन समाप्त होता है और मैं बहुत उत्साहित हूँ कल क्या होगा, क्योंकि अभी यहीं पे सब कुछ खत्म नहीं